The German shepherd's low growl cut through the wedding ceremony like a blade through silk. Every head in the packed chapel turned toward the back row where Detective Sarah Chen sat frozen, her hand instinctively tightening on Rex's leather leash. The majestic dog, 90 pounds of muscle, intelligence, and unwavering loyalty, had his dark eyes locked on something that made his hackles rise like tiny daggers along his spine. "Rex, down," Sarah whispered urgently, her voice barely audible, over the organ music that had suddenly become discordant in her ears. But the 8-year-old K9 veteran refused to obey. In 5 years of partnership, through drug busts in the worst neighborhoods of Chicago, through the chaos of crowd control during riots, through the blood-soaked aftermath of gang warfare, Rex had never, not once, disobeyed a direct command, until now. The bride, radiant in her grandmother's vintage lace, glanced nervously over her shoulder. Her smile faltered when she saw the massive dog standing rigid, every muscle coiled like a spring. The groom, handsome in his navy dress uniform, followed her gaze and his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. To most guests it might have looked like mild annoyance at the disruption. But Sarah had spent too many years reading faces, reading fear, reading guilt. That wasn't annoyance in Lieutenant Marcus Vega's eyes. That was panic. "Dearly beloved," the minister continued, his voice wavering slightly as Rex's growl deepened, "we are gathered here today." The growl became a bark. Not the sharp, commanding bark Rex used during arrests, but something else entirely. Something primal and desperate that seemed to vibrate through the stone walls of St. Mary's Cathedral. Several guests gasped. A baby began to cry. The maid of honor, Sarah recognized her as Vega's sister Carmen, shot a pleading look toward the back of the church. Sarah felt every eye in the chapel boring into her, felt the weight of judgment and embarrassment crushing down on her shoulders. She should leave. She should drag Rex outside and figure out what had gotten into him. Any other cop would have done exactly that, would have muttered apologies and slipped away to avoid causing a scene at their colleague's wedding. But Rex's behavior wasn't random. In their 5 years together, she'd learned to trust his instincts more than her own. When he'd alerted on that seemingly empty warehouse in Pilsen, they'd found enough fentanyl to kill half the South Side. When he'd refused to let her enter, that abandoned apartment building in Garfield Park, the floor had collapsed 20 minutes later. When he'd insisted on searching that clean hotel room in the Loop, they'd discovered the child trafficking operation that had made national headlines. Rex was never wrong, ever. For better or for worse, the minister pressed on, sweat beading on his forehead despite the October chill seeping through the cathedral's ancient windows. For richer or for poorer, Rex lunged forward, nearly yanking Sarah from her seat. His powerful body strained against the leash with such force that the leather cut into her palm. He wasn't looking at the bride anymore, wasn't even looking at the groom. His laser focus had shifted to something else entirely, the black leather messenger bag sitting beside the altar, tucked discreetly behind a spray of white lilies. The groom's bag. Sarah's blood turned to ice water in her veins. In all her years of police work, she'd seen that exact behavior only in specific circumstances. Rex was alerting. Not just alerting, he was screaming a warning in the only language he knew, in sickness and in health. The bag. There was something in that bag that Rex's nose had detected from 50 feet away, something that had triggered every alarm in his highly trained system, something that made a decorated police dog abandon years of discipline and conditioning to sound a warning that could save lives. The question that made Sarah's hands shake wasn't what Rex had found. The question was what Lieutenant Marcus Vega, war hero, decorated police officer, beloved colleague, was hiding in that bag on his wedding day. 3 years earlier, the first time Sarah saw Rex, he was dying. She'd been called to the veterinary emergency clinic at 2 in the morning, summoned by a voice, thick with tears that she barely recognized, as belonging to Sergeant Tom Rodriguez, one of the toughest cops in the 5th District. When she arrived, still in her pajamas with her badge clipped to her sweatshirt, she found Tom cradling the bloodied German shepherd in the parking lot, unwilling to let the medical staff take him inside. "They said he might not make it," Tom had whispered. his weathered face streaked with tears that caught the harsh fluorescent lights. 3 bullets, Sarah. The bastards put 3 bullets in him, and he still dragged himself 20 yards to get to me. Still tried to protect me even while he was bleeding out. Rex had been Tom's partner for 4 years, had saved his life twice during drug raids in the worst parts of the city. But Tom was retiring, moving to Florida to live with his daughter, and the department's K-9 unit was being restructured. Rex needed a new handler, if he survived the night. Sarah had volunteered without hesitation, though she'd never worked with dogs before. Something about the way Rex had looked at her through pain-clouded eyes, something about the fierce intelligence that burned there, even as his life leaked out onto the concrete, had called to her in a way she couldn't explain. The wow. Surgery took 6 hours. The recovery took 3 months. And somewhere in those long weeks of rehabilitation, of carrying Rex up and down the stairs to her apartment because he couldn't manage them himself, of hand-feeding him when he was too weak to lift his head to, his bowl of sleeping on the floor beside his bed because he whimpered when left alone, somewhere in those quiet moments, they'd bonded in a way that transcended the typical handler-dog relationship. Rex wasn't just her partner. He was her family, her protector, her compass when the moral landscape of police work became too murky to navigate alone. He remembers everything, the K-9 trainer had explained during their certification process. German Shepherds have incredible memory recall, especially for traumatic events. Rex will never forget being shot, will never forget Tom, will never forget the smell of the man who pulled that trigger. That's his strength and his burden. He carries every experience with him. Sarah had learned to read Rex's memories in his behavior. The way he still favored his left rear leg when it rained, where the deepest bullet had lodged. The way he positioned himself between her and any doorway, having learned that danger could come from unexpected angles. The way he studied every face in a crowd, searching for threats that most humans would never notice. But it was more than just professional training that bound them together. Rex had saved her life too, though not from bullets or criminals. He'd saved her from the crushing loneliness that had been consuming her since her divorce, from the bitter cynicism that had been poisoning her faith in humanity. Having something that loved her unconditionally, that needed her, that trusted her completely, it had pulled her back from an edge she hadn't even realized she'd been approaching. "Good boy," she whispered now, her voice barely audible as Rex continued to strain toward the altar. "Good boy, I trust you." Because that was the truth. She trusted Rex more than she trusted her own instincts, more than she trusted the evidence of her own eyes. If he said something was wrong, something was wrong, even if it meant destroying the wedding of a fellow officer, even if it meant confronting a decorated war veteran in front of 200 witnesses, even if it meant risking her career and her reputation on the judgment of a dog. Rex had never been wrong before. She prayed to God he was wrong now. But deep in her gut, in that place where instinct lived, she knew he wasn't. The ceremony ground to a halt. Perhaps we could continue this celebration without distractions, the minister suggested delicately, his eyes darting between Rex's massive form and the increasingly uncomfortable congregation. Whispers rippled through the pews like wind through wheat. "Is that dog sick? Why won't it stop barking?" Someone should call animal control, Sarah felt, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. But Rex's behavior was escalating beyond anything she'd ever witnessed. The dog was practically vibrating with tension, his entire body focused on that black leather bag, with an intensity that made her stomach clench with dread. Lieutenant Vega stepped forward, his military bearing intact despite the situation. At 35, he cut an impressive figure in his dress uniform, broad shoulders, square jaw, the kind of presence that commanded respect in both military and police circles. His service record was impeccable. 2 tours in Afghanistan, decorated for valor, seamless transition to civilian law enforcement. Everyone in the 5th District looked up to him. "I'm sorry about this," Vega called out, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Detective Chen, perhaps you could remove your partner so we can proceed." It was a reasonable request. A polite request, the kind of request that any rational person would comply with immediately. But as Vega spoke, Rex's reaction intensified. The dog bared his teeth, not in aggression toward the humans, but in response to something only he could detect. His nose worked frantically, testing the air, and Sarah realized with growing horror that he was tracking a scent that was getting stronger. "Rex, heel," she commanded, but her voice lacked conviction. She was starting to notice things that her conscious mind had missed before. The way Vega's hand kept drifting toward that black bag, the sheen of perspiration on his forehead, despite the cool October air, the almost imperceptible tremor in his left hand. Detective Paul Morrison, seated 2 rows ahead, turned to look at her with concern. Paul was a 20-year veteran, had worked narcotics before transferring to homicide. His expression shifted from annoyance to professional interest as he watched Rex's behavior. "Sarah," Paul said quietly, rising from his seat. "What's he alerting on?" The question hung in the air like a loaded gun, because that's exactly what Rex was doing. Alerting. Every cop in the cathedral recognized the behavior now. This wasn't a dog being disruptive or poorly trained. This was a highly skilled canine officer doing his job, following his training, responding to something that had triggered his specialized conditioning. "I don't know," Sarah admitted, but that was a lie. She had a terrible suspicion, one that made her mouth go dry and her hands shake. Rex's training covered multiple areas: explosives, narcotics, cadaver detection. His current behavior pattern most closely matched his explosives alert, but it could be Detective Chen. Carmen Vega's voice cut through the murmur of concerned guests. The maid of honor had moved protectively closer to her brother, her dark eyes flashing with a mixture of embarrassment and anger. "This is my brother's wedding day, whatever game you're playing." "It's not a game," Sarah interrupted, surprised by the steel in her own voice. "Rex doesn't make mistakes. Then what exactly is he telling you?" This came from Lieutenant Vega himself, who had abandoned his position at the altar and was walking down the aisle toward them. His bride remained at the front of the church, tears of frustration beginning to streak her carefully applied makeup. Sarah watched Vega approach, noting details she'd missed before. The way he moved, controlled, deliberate, but with an underlying tension that spoke of barely contained stress. The way he kept his right hand slightly behind his body, close to where his service weapon would normally rest. The way his eyes never quite met hers, instead tracking Rex's movements with the kind of hyper-awareness that came from feeling hunted. "He's alerting," she said simply, "on something in this church." "Alerting on what, specifically?" Vega's voice remained steady, but Sarah caught the slight emphasis on the word specifically. He was fishing, trying to determine exactly what Rex had detected. Before Sarah could answer, Rex broke free. The leash slipped from her surprised grip. As the powerful dog launched himself forward, not toward any person, but toward that black leather bag beside the altar. Gasps echoed through the cathedral as Rex bounded up the steps, his focus laser-sharp on his target. "Rex, no!" Sarah shouted, but it was too late. The dog reached the bag and immediately went into his full alert position, sitting rigidly, staring at the bag, his entire body communicating one clear message: danger, threat, warning. The silence that followed was deafening. 200 wedding guests stared at a German shepherd sitting beside a black leather messenger bag, and everyone in the cathedral understood that they were witnessing something that would change everything. Lieutenant Marcus Vega's face had gone absolutely white. 18 months earlier, Sarah's hands were still shaking as she filled out the incident report, the adrenaline from the morning's raid refusing to leave her system. She and Rex had been first through the door of the suspected meth lab in Englewood, following a tip from a reliable informant. What they'd found inside had been far worse than anyone expected. Not drugs. Bodies. 3 of them. Execution style. All bearing the signature markings of the Los Hermanos cartel. The crime scene had been staged to look like a drug deal gone wrong, but Rex's nose had told a different story. He'd alerted on trace amounts of military-grade explosives residue near the back door, C4 specifically, the kind of plastic explosive that wasn't readily available on the street. Professional job, Detective Morrison had concluded after the forensics team finished processing the scene. This wasn't random gang violence. Someone with military training did this. The case had gone cold within weeks, No witnesses, no surveillance footage, no physical evidence beyond what Rex had detected. The explosive residue could have been explained. Away, construction work, mining equipment, any number of legitimate sources. But Sarah remembered the scene, remembered the precision of the kills, remembered Rex's certainty about what he'd smelled. Now, watching her partner maintain his rigid, alert position beside Lieutenant Vega's bag, those memories came flooding back with terrifying clarity. "Detective Chen," Chief Patterson's voice cut through her recollection. The chief had arrived within minutes of someone calling 911, his presence commanding immediate attention from everyone in the cathedral. At 62, Patterson was old-school police, the kind of man who'd earned his rank through decades of street work rather than political maneuvering. "What's the situation here?" Sarah looked from Rex to Vega to the bag that had become the center of everyone's attention. The black leather messenger bag sat innocently beside the altar, but Rex hadn't moved from his alert position. In K9 training, dogs were taught to maintain alert until specifically released by their handler. Rex would sit there all day if necessary, his body language screaming that there was something dangerous inside that bag. "Rex is alerting on explosive residue," Sarah said, the words feeling like lead weights in her mouth. Same signature he detected at the Englewood scene 18 months ago. A collective intake of breath echoed through the cathedral. Several guests began moving toward the exits, but Chief Patterson's raised hand stopped them. "Nobody leaves," he commanded. "This is now a potential crime scene." Lieutenant Vega stepped forward, his military bearing still intact but stress cracks beginning to show. "Chief, with respect, this is my wedding day. I don't know what Detective Chen thinks she's accomplishing." "Lieutenant," Patterson interrupted, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "That's one of our best K9 officers over there. If Rex says there's something in your bag, then there's something in your bag. The question is whether you want to open it voluntarily or wait for the bomb squad." "Bomb squad?" The bride's voice rose to near hysteria. "Someone please tell me what's happening." Sarah moved slowly toward the altar, her heart hammering against her ribs. Rex tracked her approach but maintained his position, his dark eyes communicating trust and certainty. As she got closer, she could see what her partner was responding to, a faint chemical scent that human noses couldn't detect, but that would trigger immediate recognition in a dog trained for explosives detection. "Marcus," she said quietly, using his first name for the first time in their professional relationship. "Talk to me. What's in the bag?" Vega's composure finally cracked. The mask of calm authority slipped, revealing something raw and desperate underneath. "How you don't understand," he whispered. "None of you understand what I've been carrying around." "Then help us understand," Chief Patterson said, moving closer but keeping his hand near his service weapon. Other officers had begun filtering into the cathedral. Paul Morrison, Detective Lisa Santos, Sergeant Rodriguez, who had driven over from his retirement party. The wedding had transformed into something else entirely. "It started in Afghanistan," Vega began, his voice hollow. "My unit, we were tasked with eliminating high-value targets, off-books operations, the kind of missions that don't exist in official records." Sarah felt ice crystallizing in her veins. Rex's alert 18 months ago, the professional execution-style murders, the military-grade explosives. "Marcus," she said carefully, "what's in the bag?" He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw something that made her soul ache. Fear, shame, and underneath it all, a kind of relief that his secrets were finally coming to light. "Evidence," he whispered. "Evidence of what I've done. What I've been ordered to do, what I can't live with anymore." The silence stretched taut as piano wire. Rex never moved from his alert position, his body language confirming what everyone was beginning to understand. They weren't dealing with a wedding day disruption anymore. They were dealing with a confession. "Everyone out. Now." Chief Patterson's command brooked no argument, but the evacuation of St. Mary's Cathedral became a barely controlled chaos. 200 wedding guests, family members, fellow officers, friends, streamed toward the exits while uniformed cops tried to maintain order and establish a perimeter. Sarah remained frozen beside the altar, Rex still locked in his alert position. The black leather bag sat between them like a malignant tumor, containing secrets that had already begun to tear apart the carefully constructed facade of Lieutenant Marcus Vega's life. "Not you, Detective," Patterson said as Sarah began to move toward the door. "You and Rex stay. You're the only ones who can tell us what we're dealing with." The bride, Sarah realized with a shock that she didn't even know the woman's name, was being led away by Carmen Vega, both women sobbing. The wedding dress, so beautiful just minutes before, now seemed like a costume from a play that had taken a dark turn into tragedy. "Marcus," Chief Patterson's voice carried the tone of a father disappointed in his son, "I need you to very slowly, very carefully explain to me what Detective Chen's dog has found." Vega stood at the center of the emptying cathedral, no longer the confident officer who had commanded respect from his colleagues. The military bearing had collapsed entirely, leaving behind a man who looked like he'd been carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders for too long. "Dog knows," he said simply, his eyes fixed on Rex. "Damn dog knows everything." Detective Morrison approached cautiously, his service weapon drawn but pointed at the ground. "Marcus, whatever this is, we can work through it, but I need you to step away from that bag." "You don't understand," Vega's voice rose, desperation creeping in. "I never wanted any of this. The things I've done, the people I've killed, it was orders, always orders. But that doesn't make it right, does it?" Sarah felt her heart breaking for this man she'd respected, this colleague who had mentored younger officers, who had served his country with honor. But Rex's unwavering alert reminded her that whatever sympathy she felt, there was still something dangerous in that bag. "The Englewood murders," she said quietly. "That was you." It wasn't a question. Rex's behavior, the explosive residue, the professional execution, it all pointed to the same conclusion. Vega's laugh was bitter and broken. Los Hermanos thought they were untouchable, thought they could traffic kids through Chicago without consequences. My CIA handler, he gave me the green light. CIA. Chief Patterson's voice cracked like a whip. "Marcus, what the hell are you talking about?" "Black Ops, Chief. The kind of operations that don't exist on paper. I was supposed to retire from the army, become a cop, blend into civilian life. But they never let you really retire, do they? There's always one more mission, one more target, one more problem that needs to be solved quietly." Rex whined softly, the first sound he'd made since taking his alert position. Sarah looked down at her partner and saw something that made her blood run cold. The dog was trembling, not with fear, but with the effort of maintaining his position while every instinct screamed at him to either attack or flee. "What else is in the bag, Marcus?" she asked. "Everything," he whispered. "Photos of the targets, mission briefings, communications with my handler, and—" He stopped, his face crumbling. "And what?" "The next assignment, the one I was supposed to complete after my honeymoon." Silence fell over the cathedral like a shroud. Outside, Sarah could hear the organized chaos of the bomb squad arriving, their voices professional and clipped as they set up their equipment. But inside, in the sacred space where moments before a man and woman had been pledging their love, there was only the truth hanging in the air like poison gas. "Who's the target?" Morrison asked, though Sarah could tell from his expression that he already suspected the answer. Vega's eyes found Sarah's across the space between them. "You," he said simply. "You and that damn dog. You're getting too close to things that need to stay buried." The words hit her like a physical blow. Rex's behavior over the past few months suddenly made a different kind of sense. The way he'd been more protective, more alert, the way he seemed to be watching for threats, even during routine patrols. Her partner had sensed the danger before. She'd even known she was in it. "The wedding was supposed to be perfect cover," Vega continued, his voice growing stronger as the confession poured out of him. "Public place, lots of witnesses, easy to make it look like an accident. Bomb goes off during the ceremony, takes out a section of pews. Tragic terrorist attack, or maybe just faulty wiring in an old building. But that dog—" He looked at Rex, with something between admiration and hatred. "That damn dog smelled the truth." Chief Patterson was speaking into his radio, calling for additional backup, for FBI involvement. for the kind of response that turned quiet Chicago neighborhoods into war zones. But Sarah barely heard him. Her attention was fixed entirely on the man who had planned to kill her, who had been willing to murder innocent wedding guests to complete his mission. "Why?" she asked. "What did I do that was worth killing for?" Vega's smile was sad and tired. "You cared too much, Detective. You and Rex, you never let cases go cold. You keep digging, keep asking questions, keep following leads that other people want buried. The Englewood case was supposed to be written off as gang violence, but you kept pushing, kept following Rex's nose, and sooner or later you were going to figure out who really killed those 3 dealers. So you planned to murder me at your own wedding. I planned to stop caring," he corrected, "about orders, about missions, about keeping secrets that were eating me alive. But they wouldn't let me stop, said I was too valuable, knew too much, had too many skills to waste on being a regular cop." Rex broke his alert position for the first time, not to move away from the bag, but to place himself protectively between Sarah and Vega. The gesture was small but unmistakable. Her partner had assessed the situation and determined that the immediate threat wasn't the bag anymore. It was the broken man standing 10 feet away. "The bag's not a bomb," Sarah realized aloud. "It's evidence. You brought evidence to your own wedding because you were planning to confess." Vega nodded slowly. "I was going to tell Maria everything after the ceremony. Show her what kind of man she was really marrying. Give her a chance to run before it was too late." His voice broke. "But I couldn't do it, couldn't destroy her life like that. So I thought, maybe one last mission. Clean up the loose ends, eliminate the threats, and then maybe they'd finally let me retire for real. Or maybe you'd plan to eat your gun afterward," Morrison said bluntly. "Because there's no walking away from attempting to murder a police officer." The truth of that statement hung in the air between them. Whatever Marcus Vega had been planning, whatever combination of murder and suicide and desperation had brought him to this moment, it was over now. Rex's nose had unraveled months of careful planning in a matter of minutes. "I'm sorry, Sarah," Vega said quietly, "for what I was going to do, for what I've already done, for everything." "You can tell that to the judge," she replied, but there was no satisfaction in the words. Only sadness for a good man who had been twisted into something monstrous by forces beyond his control. The bomb squad entered the cathedral, their heavy gear and professional demeanor transforming the sacred space into a crime scene. But Sarah knew they wouldn't find explosives in that black leather bag. They would find something much more dangerous: the truth. And as Rex finally relaxed his rigid alert posture and came to sit beside her, pressing his warm body against her legs in a gesture of comfort and protection, Sarah realized that this was only the beginning. If Vega had been working for the CIA, if there were black ops missions being conducted on American soil, if police officers were being recruited for assassination assignments, the bag was just the tip of an iceberg that could sink everything. She'd believed about justice, about law enforcement, about the system she'd devoted her life to serving, but at least she had Rex. At least she had one thing in this world that was pure and honest and loyal. One partner who would always tell her the truth no matter how much it hurt. The dog who had saved her life by stopping a wedding. 2 hours later, FBI Field Office, Chicago. The contents of Marcus Vega's black leather bag lay spread across the conference table like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle depicting hell itself. Sarah sat beside Rex, both of them still in their wedding attire. Her navy dress wrinkled from stress, his canine vest somehow still perfectly positioned despite the chaos at the cathedral. FBI Special Agent Catherine Walsh examined each document, with the methodical precision of someone who had seen too many government conspiracies to be shocked by another one. At 45, Walsh carried herself with the quiet authority of a woman who had climbed the Bureau's ranks through competence rather than politics. Her grey eyes missed nothing as they moved from photograph to mission, brief to encrypted communication. "Logs. Jesus Christ, Marcus," she murmured, holding up an 8x10 glossy photograph that made Sarah's stomach turn. 3 bodies in an Englewood warehouse, positioned exactly as she and Rex had found them 18 months ago. But this photo had been taken before the official crime scene photos, before the police had arrived. It showed the scene immediately, after the execution, with details that had never been released to law enforcement. "How long has this been going on?" Chief Patterson asked, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. He'd been Sarah's mentor for 8 years, had trusted her judgment, had backed her and Rex through every controversial case. Now he was learning that one of his own officers had been operating as an assassin under his nose. "Since I came back." "From my second tour," Vega answered quietly. He sat in handcuffs at the far end of the table, flanked by 2 federal marshals. The transformation from decorated officer to broken prisoner was complete. CIA approached me while I was still in the Army. Said my skills were too valuable to waste on civilian life. Offered me a way to keep serving my country. Just differently. Agent Walsh set down another document, a mission brief dated just 3 weeks earlier. Sarah's photograph was paper-clipped to the front page, along with Rex's K9 certification, records and a detailed analysis of their case clearance rates. "They wanted us dead because we were too good at our jobs," Sarah asked, incredulous. "Because you were asking the right questions," Walsh corrected. "Look at this." She spread out a timeline that someone had meticulously constructed, tracking Sarah and Rex's investigations over the past 2 years. Red marks indicated cases that had intersected with what the documents called Operation Nightfall, a domestic black ops program that had been eliminating problematic elements throughout the Midwest. Drug dealers who wouldn't cooperate with federal investigations, gang leaders who were threatening to expose government informants, corrupt politicians who knew too much about weapons trafficking, and cops. Walsh's voice trailed off as she found Sarah's name on a list of 12 law enforcement officers marked for elimination. 12? Chief Patterson's face had gone white. How many others? Detective Ray Sullivan in Milwaukee, killed in what looked like a car accident last spring. Sergeant Michelle Torres in Detroit, died in an apparent home invasion 3 months. Haggov? Officer James Park in Cleveland, suicide according to the report, though his family insisted he wasn't depressed. The names hit Sarah like physical blows. She'd known Sullivan from a multi-jurisdictional task force, had worked a case with Torres 2 years ago, had met Park at a K9 training seminar. Good cops, dedicated officers, all dead because they'd been too thorough, too honest, too unwilling to let sleeping dogs lie. Rex whined softly and pressed closer to her leg, sensing her distress. His warm presence was the only thing keeping her grounded, as the full scope of the conspiracy became clear. "Who's running this?" she asked. Agent Walsh pulled out a photograph that made everyone in the room suck in their breath. A distinguished man in his 60s, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, wearing a general's uniform studded with ribbons and decorations. "General Harrison Pike," she said. 30-year Army veteran, decorated war hero, current director of the Defense Intelligence Agency. Also apparently the architect of a domestic assassination program that's been operating for at least 5 years. "Pike," Patterson whispered. "I know that name. He spoke at the police chief's convention last year, talked about the need for enhanced cooperation between local law enforcement and federal intelligence agencies." "Enhanced cooperation," Sarah repeated bitterly. "Is that what we're calling murder now?" Vega looked up from his handcuffs, his eyes hollow but determined. "There's more," he said quietly. "The bag. There's a hidden compartment, behind the leather lining." Agent Walsh examined the messenger bag more carefully, running her fingers along the seams until she found a nearly invisible zipper. Inside the hidden compartment was a small digital recorder and a smartphone with a cracked screen. "Voice recordings of Pike giving kill orders," Vega explained. "Photos of the payoffs, the offshore accounts, the weapons shipments, everything. I could gather over the past 6 months once I realized I had to get out." Walsh plugged the recorder into her laptop and activated the speakers. General Pike's voice filled the conference room, cultured and commanding, discussing the elimination of police officers like they were items on a grocery list. "Detective Chen has become a liability," Pike's recorded voice stated with chilling matter-of-factness. "Her K9 partner has compromised 3 separate operations. The wedding presents an optimal opportunity for elimination while maintaining plausible deniability." Sarah felt bile rise in her throat. These people had been planning her death while she shopped for a wedding gift, while she pressed her dress uniform, while she looked forward to celebrating a colleague's happiness. Why the wedding? Agent Walsh asked Vega. Public location, lots of witnesses, easy to make it look accidental. The plan was to detonate a small explosive device during the ceremony, something that would look like faulty wiring or a gas leak. Sarah and Rex always sit in the back row near the old heating vents. The blast would have taken out that section, while leaving most of the guests unharmed. But you couldn't go through with it, Sarah said, understanding dawning. I looked out at all those people. Maria so beautiful and happy, my sister crying with joy, and I realized I couldn't destroy all of that, just to save my own skin. So I brought the evidence instead. Thought maybe if I could expose Pike, if I could give you everything I knew, it might be enough to end this. Rex suddenly lifted his head, ears pricked forward in the alert position that Sarah knew meant he'd detected something. His nose worked. The air in his body tensed with the focused intensity that had saved her life dozens of times. What is it, boy? She whispered. The dog moved toward the conference room door, his hackles rising. Sarah had learned to trust Rex's instincts completely, and right now those instincts were screaming danger. We need to move, she said urgently. Rex is alerting on something. Agent Walsh was already reaching for her weapon when the lights went. Out emergency lighting kicked in a second later, bathing the conference room in an eerie red glow. Through the reinforced windows, Sarah could see muzzle flashes in the parking lot below. The FBI field office was under attack. Lockdown protocol, Walsh shouted into her radio. Federal building under assault. Repeat. Federal building under assault. Rex positioned himself between Sarah and the door, his body coiled for action. In the hellish red light, his dark eyes reflected an intelligence that seemed almost human, an understanding that they were trapped, outnumbered, and facing an enemy that had unlimited resources and no conscience. How did they find us so fast? Patterson demanded. Vega's laugh was bitter and hopeless. You think the FBI's clean? Pike has people everywhere, Chief. Everywhere. The moment we brought that bag into this building, we signed our own death warrants. The sound of automatic weapons fire echoed through the corridors outside their door. Sarah could hear shouting, running footsteps, the controlled chaos of federal agents responding to an assault on their own headquarters. How many people are going to die because of what's in that bag? She asked. However many it takes to keep Pike's secrets buried, Vega answered. Rex growled low in his throat, his attention fixed on something beyond the conference room door. Sarah had worked with him long enough to read his body language like a book, and what she saw there made her heart race with terror. Someone was coming. Someone Rex didn't recognize as friendly. Someone who was very, very close. The conference room door exploded inward in a shower of wood splinters and smoke. 3 figures, in tactical gear, stormed through the breach, their faces hidden behind military-grade night vision goggles. They moved with the precision of elite soldiers, weapons up and ready, clearing corners with practiced efficiency. Rex launched himself at the lead operative without hesitation, 90 pounds of muscle and fury slamming into the intruder's chest. The impact sent both dog and human crashing into the wall, Rex's teeth finding purchase on the Kevlar vest as they went down. Sarah drew her service weapon, but Agent Walsh was already moving, her FBI training taking over. "Federal agents," she shouted, though bullets were already flying. The second operative's rifle swung towards Sarah, but Chief Patterson stepped into the line of fire, his own weapon barking twice. The operative stumbled backward, body armor absorbing most of the impact, but the force still sending him reeling. "Rex, release," Sarah commanded, needing her partner clear of the crossfire. The German shepherd obeyed instantly, rolling away from his target just as the third operative opened fire. Bullets sparked off the conference table, sending documents, scattering like deadly confetti. In the chaos, Marcus Vega had somehow gotten to his feet despite his handcuffs. One of the federal marshals was down, blood spreading across his white shirt, while the other was pinned behind an overturned chair. "Drive!" Vega shouted over the gunfire. "There's a backup drive in my jacket pocket. Everything's on there." Sarah saw the lead operative recovering from Rex's attack, raising his rifle toward her partner. Without thinking, she put 2 rounds center mass into the man's chest. The body armor absorbed the bullets, but the impact sent him stumbling backward. Through the shattered doorway, Agent Walsh had taken cover behind her laptop. returning fire with deadly accuracy. Her shots forced the remaining operatives back into the corridor, buying them precious seconds. "Building's compromised," she said into her radio. "Need immediate evac for the witnesses." Rex had positioned himself beside Sarah, blood on his muzzle. From his encounter with the tactical vest, but otherwise unharmed. His dark eyes were locked on the doorway, ready for the next wave of attackers. "How many more are there?" Patterson asked, reloading his weapon with hands that shook only slightly. "Doesn't matter," Vega replied grimly. "Pike won't stop until everyone in this room is dead, and that evidence is destroyed." As if summoned by his words, more movement appeared in the corridor. But these weren't tactical operatives. These were FBI agents, real ones, responding to the assault on their own. "Building. Friendly," Agent Walsh called out. Federal agents in the conference room. Special Agent Rodriguez appeared in the doorway, his team providing cover as they secured the area. "Building's clear," he reported, "but we've got casualties throughout the structure." This was a coordinated assault. Sarah helped the wounded marshal to his feet while Rex maintained his protective position. The dog's training had taken over completely. He was no longer a pet or even a police K9, but a warrior protecting his pack. "The evidence," Walsh said, gathering the scattered documents from Vega's bag. "We need to get this to Washington immediately." "No," Sarah said firmly. "Washington's compromised. Pike has people everywhere, remember? The moment this evidence hits official channels, it disappears forever." "Then what do you suggest?" Sarah looked at Rex, then at the blood-stained documents that represented the truth about a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of government. Her partner had risked everything to expose this corruption, had followed his nose and his instincts to uncover a plot that would have killed her and countless others. "We go public," she said. "All of it. Every document, every recording, every photograph, we give it to every news outlet, every journalist, every blogger who will listen. Make it impossible to suppress." Agent Walsh nodded slowly. "Media blitz. Flood. The zone with so much information that they can't possibly silence all of it." "What about Pike?" Patterson asked. "He's not just going to surrender because we embarrassed him on the evening news." As if in answer to his question, Walsh's phone buzzed with an incoming call. She checked the caller ID and her face went pale. "It's him," she whispered. "It's General Pike." The conference room fell silent except for the distant sounds of emergency responders in the corridors. Walsh put the phone on speaker and answered. "Agent Walsh." "Agent Walsh." Pike's voice was cultured, controlled, completely at odds with the violence that had just torn through the FBI building. "I believe you have something that belongs to me. What I have, General, is evidence of treason, evidence of murder, evidence of a conspiracy that goes to the very heart of our government." Pike's laugh was genuinely amused. "Evidence of what, Agent Walsh? Of patriotic Americans doing whatever it takes to protect this country from threats both foreign and domestic? Of dedicated soldiers following orders to eliminate dangerous criminals and corrupt cops? Cops? Corrupt cops." Sarah stepped closer to the phone, her voice shaking with rage. "Is that what you call officers who won't look the other way while you conduct assassination operations on American soil?" "Detective Chen, I was hoping you'd survived. The evening's unpleasantness. You and that remarkable dog of yours." Rex growled at the sound of Pike's voice, as if he could sense the malevolence even through the phone's speaker. "Tell me, Detective," Pike continued, "what do you think happens now? You've exposed a classified operation, compromised national security, gotten federal agents killed. Even if you survive the night, which is far from guaranteed, do you really think anyone will believe your story? A disgraced police detective and a mentally unstable former army officer with a grudge against his superiors. "They'll believe the evidence," Walsh interjected. "What evidence? A bag full of forged documents, fabricated recordings, digital files that could have been created by any competent hacker? Come now, Agent Walsh, you know how this game is played." Sarah felt despair creeping in. Pike was right. With his resources, his connections, his ability to discredit witnesses and manipulate evidence, he could probably weather any storm they tried to create. But then Rex stepped forward, placed his paw on the conference table, and looked directly at her with those intelligent dark eyes that had never lied to her, never failed her, never led her astray. And Sarah understood. "You're wrong about one thing, General," she said quietly. "Oh? And what's that?" "You can discredit documents. You can claim recordings are fake. You can make witnesses disappear. But you can't fake what Rex found at that wedding." "I'm afraid I don't follow." Sarah smiled grimly. "Every cop in that cathedral saw Rex alert on your operative's bag. They saw him refuse to stand down, saw him maintain position despite direct commands. 200 witnesses watched a trained police dog risk his career and his handler's reputation to expose evidence of a crime. The word of a dog, detective, that's your smoking gun? The word of a dog with a perfect record. Rex has never given a false alert in 5 years of service, never failed to detect what he was trained to find. Every cop who's worked with him knows that when Rex alerts, there's something there. And now they all know that he alerted on evidence that a decorated army officer was planning to commit murder." The silence on the phone stretched long enough that Sarah wondered if Pike had hung up. "You think you've won?" His voice finally came, back, colder now, stripped of its earlier amusement. "You think exposing me will change anything? But there are others, detective. There will always be others. Men and women who understand that sometimes democracy must be protected from itself, that sometimes the Constitution is a luxury we can't afford." "Maybe," Sarah admitted, "but at least everyone will know the truth about you." "And what about the truth about Marcus Vega? What about the truth about the things he's done in service to his country? How many families will be destroyed when they learn that their war hero is actually a government assassin?" Sarah looked at Vega, who had been silent throughout the conversation. The former lieutenant met her eyes and nodded slightly. "Permission to tell his story, whatever the cost. Then that's a price we'll have to pay," she said, "for the truth." Pike's final words were barely above a whisper, but they carried the weight of absolute certainty. "This isn't over, detective. It will never be over." The line went dead. 3 days later, WGN News Studios, Chicago, Sarah sat under the harsh television lights, Rex beside her chair, both of them wearing their dress uniforms for what felt like the 100th interview since the story broke. Across from them, veteran journalist Helen Morrison, no relation to Detective Paul Morrison, leaned forward with the intensity of someone who knew she was covering the story of her career. "The documents you've released paint a picture of systematic assassination operations conducted on American soil by our own government," Morrison said. "Operations that targeted law enforcement officers who were, according to these files, guilty of nothing more than doing their jobs too well. How does that make you feel, Detective Chen?" Sarah chose her words carefully. In the 72 hours since Agent Walsh had simultaneously released Vega's evidence to every major news outlet in the country, the story had exploded across every form of media. Cable news networks were running continuous coverage. Newspaper headlines screamed about government conspiracies. Social media buzzed with hashtags like Operation Nightfall and Justice for Rex. "It makes me grateful," Sarah said. "Grateful that Rex's training and instincts were strong enough to expose this conspiracy before more innocent people died. And grateful that we live in a country where the truth can still see daylight, even when powerful people try to bury it. Rex, your K9 partner, has become something of a folk hero in the past few days. There are Good Boy Rex memes trending on social media. Children have started writing him letters, and I understand there's already talk of a book deal. How do you respond to people who say a dog shouldn't be the face of such a serious investigation?" Sarah reached down to scratch behind Rex's ears, feeling the solid warmth of his presence. "Rex isn't the face of this investigation because he's a dog. He's the face of it because he represents something we've lost sight of in our society. Absolute integrity. Rex doesn't have political affiliations. He doesn't have personal ambitions or financial incentives. He just does his job, follows his training, and tells the truth no matter how inconvenient that truth might be." General Pike resigned his position yesterday and has retained private counsel. Lieutenant Marcus Vega is cooperating with federal investigators and is expected to testify before Congress next month. What do you think justice looks like in a case like this? Sarah had been dreading this question. The easy answer was that Pike should go to prison for the rest of his life, that everyone involved in Operation Nightfall should face the full consequences of their actions. But the reality was more complicated. Marcus Vega is a victim as much as he is a perpetrator, she said carefully. He was recruited by people he trusted, people who represented the government he'd sworn to serve. They twisted his loyalty and his patriotism into something monstrous. That doesn't excuse what he did, but it explains it. As for Pike, she paused, choosing her words. I think the American people deserve to know the full truth about what their government has been doing in their name. And then they deserve to decide what consequences are appropriate. There are reports that other police departments across the country have begun reviewing cold cases, looking for patterns that might indicate similar operations. Are you concerned that Operation Nightfall was larger than what you've exposed, Rex? Shifted slightly in his position, and Sarah noticed his ears prick forward. He'd been unusually alert since the story broke, as if he sensed that their lives had fundamentally changed, that they were now public figures, whether they liked it or not. I hope other departments will look closely at their unsolved cases, Sarah said. Rex and I will continue doing our jobs, following leads wherever they take us. If there are more conspiracies to uncover, more corruption to expose, then that's what we'll do. You've received death threats since this story broke. There are reports of suspicious vehicles near your home, strangers asking questions about your schedule. Are you afraid? Sarah looked down at Rex, who was watching the camera crew with professional interest. His presence had never been more reassuring than it was now, when every day brought new reminders that powerful people wanted her dead. I'm cautious, she said, but I'm not afraid. Rex and I have been through worse than this, and we've survived because we trust each other completely. That's not going to change. Final question, Detective Chen. If you could say something directly to General Pike, what would it be? Sarah thought about that question for a long moment, thought about all the officers who had died, all the families who had been destroyed, all the corruption that had been allowed to flourish in the shadows. I'd tell him that he underestimated something fundamental about the American people, she said finally. He assumed that we would be willing to trade our principles for security, that we would accept government assassination programs as long as they were conducted quietly. But he was wrong. The truth matters to us, justice matters to us, and sometimes it takes a dog to remind us what integrity actually looks like. As the interview wrapped up and the lights dimmed, Sarah felt Rex press against her leg in the gesture of comfort and protection that had become second nature to both of them. Outside the studio, protesters were gathering, some supporting her exposure of the conspiracy, others calling her a traitor for revealing classified operations. But none of that mattered as much as the simple truth that Rex had uncovered with his nose and his training and his absolute refusal to let corruption pass unnoticed. They had stopped a wedding. They had exposed a conspiracy. They had probably saved lives, and they had done it together. 9. Emotional resolution. 6 months later, Lincoln Park, Chicago. The morning sun filtered through the autumn leaves as Sarah threw a tennis ball across the open field, watching Rex. Bound after it with the enthusiasm of a puppy rather than a 9-year-old police veteran. The simple joy of the moment, dog chasing ball, handler laughing at his antics, stood in sharp contrast to the complexity of the past half year. The congressional hearings had concluded 3 weeks ago with General Pike facing federal charges for conspiracy, murder, and treason. Marcus Vega had testified for 6 grueling days, laying out the full scope of Operation Nightfall in testimony that had been broadcast live across the nation. His cooperation had earned him a reduced sentence, but he would still spend the next 15 years in federal prison. Rex brought the ball back, dropping it at Sarah's feet and sitting in the perfect position that had become as natural as breathing. She scratched behind his ears, marveling again at the intelligence in those dark eyes. You know what I realized during all those hearings, she said aloud, not caring if other park visitors thought she was crazy for talking to her dog. Pike was wrong about almost everything, but he was right about one thing. This isn't over. There will always be people who think they know better than the Constitution, who think democracy is too messy and inconvenient for the real work of protecting America. Rex tilted his head, listening with the focused attention that had made him such an effective partner. But that's okay, Sarah continued, throwing the ball again, because there will also always be people like us. People who believe in doing the right thing even when it's hard. People who trust their partners completely. People who aren't willing to look the other way when they smell something rotten. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Agent Walsh. New case. Suspicious deaths of federal judges in 3 different states. Similar MO interest you and Rex in taking a look? Sarah smiled and typed back, when do we start? The book deal had been real. Rex, the dog who stopped a conspiracy, would be published next spring, with all proceeds going to a foundation that provided medical care for retired police K9s. The movie rights had been optioned by a major studio, though Sarah had insisted on script approval to ensure Rex was portrayed accurately. But none of that mattered as much as the simple fact that she and Rex were still partners, still doing the work they'd been trained to do, still following their noses toward justice, even when it led them into dangerous territory. Detective Chen. Sarah turned to see a young woman approaching hesitantly, a small girl holding her hand. The woman looked familiar, though Sarah couldn't place her at first. I'm Maria Santos, the woman said quietly. I was supposed to marry Marcus. Vega. The recognition hit Sarah like a physical blow. She'd seen Maria's photograph in the newspapers, had read the heartbreaking interviews about a bride left at the altar when her groom was arrested for conspiracy to commit murder. But this was the first time they'd met face to face since that terrible day at St. Mary's Cathedral. Mrs. Santos, Sarah began, not sure what to say. I wanted to thank you, Maria interrupted, for stopping the wedding, for exposing the truth. I know it must have been difficult, must have felt like you were destroying something beautiful, but... She paused, wiping tears from her eyes. I was going to marry a stranger, she continued. A man I thought I knew, thought I loved, but who was living a completely different life. If you and Rex hadn't stopped that ceremony, I would have built my entire future on a lie. The little girl, Maria's daughter from a previous relationship, Sarah remembered, stepped forward and held out a crudely wrapped package. This is for Rex, she said shyly. Mama said he's a hero dog. Sarah knelt down to accept the gift, which turned out to be a hand-drawn picture of a German shepherd wearing a cape and a medal. Hero Dog Rex was written across the top in careful block letters. He'll treasure this, Sarah said seriously, showing the picture to Rex, who sniffed it politely and wagged his tail. I know Marcus hurt a lot of people, Maria said. I know he did terrible things, but I also know that bringing that evidence to his wedding, choosing to expose the truth instead of going through with whatever he'd been ordered to do, that took courage. In the end, he chose to be the man I thought I was marrying. Sarah nodded, understanding. The world wasn't divided into heroes and villains as neatly as people like to believe. Sometimes good people did terrible things. Sometimes redemption came in the form of a last-minute confession that destroyed your own life but saved others. He asks about you in his letters, Maria added. Wants to know if you're safe, if Rex is healthy. I think he genuinely cares about what happens to you. Tell him we're doing fine, Sarah said. Tell him we're still out there, still doing the work. After Maria and her daughter left, Sarah sat on a park bench with Rex beside her, watching the city wake up around them. Chicago stretched out in all directions, 8 million people going about their daily lives, most of them never knowing how close they'd come to living in a country where government assassins eliminated inconvenient cops at wedding ceremonies. You know what the scariest part is? She said to Rex. It's not that Pike and his people existed, it's that they were probably convinced they were the good guys. They thought they were protecting America by killing Americans. They thought they were preserving democracy by subverting it. Rex pressed closer to her side, offering the comfort of his presence. But that's why we matter, Sarah continued. That's why what we do matters. Because someone has to believe in the simple idea that the truth is worth pursuing, even when it's dangerous. Someone has to believe that justice is worth fighting for, even when it's inconvenient. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a call from Chief Patterson. She answered on the second ring. Sarah, I need you and Rex downtown. We've got a situation that could use your particular expertise. What kind of situation? The kind where a very smart dog might be the only one who can tell us what really happened. Sarah smiled, feeling the familiar stirring of excitement that came with a new case, a new mystery, a new chance to let Rex's remarkable nose lead them toward the truth. "We'll be right there," she said. As they walked back toward her car, Rex, trotting beside her with the easy confidence of a dog who knew exactly who he was and what he was supposed to do, Sarah reflected on the strange journey that had brought them to this moment. 6 months ago, she'd been just another cop with a K9 partner, working cases and following leads and trying to make a difference in a complicated world. Now she was a public figure, a symbol of integrity, a reminder that sometimes the most important truths came from the most unexpected sources. Rex had become a celebrity, recognized on the street by children who wanted to pet the hero dog and adults who wanted to thank him for his service. But at the end of the day, they were still just partners. Still just a cop and her dog, following their noses toward justice one case at a time. "Come on, boy," she said, opening the car door. "Let's go to work." Rex jumped into the passenger seat and settled into the position he'd occupied for thousands of miles over the past 5 years, alert, ready, completely trusting that wherever they were going there together. 10. Final line, leave a haunting image or emotional quote. As they drove through the busy streets of Chicago, toward their next case, Sarah caught Rex's reflection in the rearview mirror. His dark eyes were fixed on the road ahead, ears pricked forward, nose working to catalogue the thousands of scents that told the story of the city around them. He looked like what he had always been, a guardian, a protector, a seeker of truth in a world that often preferred comfortable lies. "You saved us all," Sarah whispered, reaching over to touch his head. "You saved us from becoming the kind of country where good dogs and honest cops get murdered for doing their jobs too well." Rex turned to look at her, and for just a moment Sarah could have sworn she saw something like understanding in those intelligent eyes. Something that said he knew exactly what they had accomplished together, exactly what it had cost, and exactly why it had been worth it. Then he turned back to the road, back to the work that was never finished, back to the eternal vigilance that was the price of freedom. In the distance, a siren wailed. Another case, another mystery, another chance for a remarkable dog to remind the world that sometimes the most important truths could only be discovered by those brave enough to follow their noses. No matter where the scent might lead, Rex's ears perked up at the sound, and his tail began to wag. He was ready to work. End of part 2, 6,000 words. In the end, it wasn't the badges or the guns or the government connections that mattered. It was the unbreakable bond between a K9 officer and his handler, the absolute trust between partners who had learned that integrity was worth any sacrifice, and the simple truth that sometimes the most important heroes walk on 4 legs and never say a word, because their actions speak louder than any speech ever could. Rex had stopped more than a wedding that day. He had stopped a conspiracy that could have destroyed the very foundations of American justice, and in doing so, he had reminded a nation that the truth, once unleashed, could never be silenced again. The dog who changed everything with a single, perfect alert.